Ever feel like you just want to really get under the skin of something complex, understand its guts, without spending days reading up on it?
Hmm.
Well, that's what we're doing right now. We're taking a deep dive into Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman.
A classic.
Yeah, forget dusty high school English for a minute. This play, nearly a century old, still has this, vice grip on the American dream and how it shapes and sometimes, well, shatters us.
Exactly. And we've got some really rich material to work with here, excerpts from an introduction to the play. It gives us a fantastic behind-the-scenes look.
Like what kind of stuff?
Well, historical context, what actually sparked Miller's imagination, and some pretty sharp critical takes, too. Think of it as your fast track to grasping the core of Willy Loman's story
Okay.
and why it still feels so relevant today.
Okay, so our mission is pretty straightforward then.
Hmm.
Pull out the most crucial insights from these sources
Yeah.
about Willie, the world he's navigating, and why this play keeps stirring conversation.
Right.
We're looking at surprising origins, a really innovative way of telling the story, characters that feel like people you might actually know,
Yeah, definitely.
and those big, uncomfortable questions the play just throws right in your face.
Precisely. We'll be, tracing the play back to Miller's own life, exploring how its unique structure actually enhances its meaning,
Why?
peeling back the layers of these unforgettable characters, and looking at the different ways Miller himself and other thinkers have interpreted its power.
Okay, let's unpack this then. It all seems to start with this massive idea, right? The American dream.
Absolutely.
The introduction reminds us that the Depression really knocked the wind out of American optimism.
For sure.
But that fundamental faith in the future, especially for people who came here looking for something better, it didn't just vanish. It's like it's woven into the national DNA almost.
And what's fascinating is how Charlie's simple line, a salesman has got a dream, it isn't just about Willie's personal ambition.
Right.
It reflects this really deep-seated cultural belief that tomorrow will be better, that striving for more is, well, essential. It's almost a societal imperative.
And the play, even though it's set a bit after the Depression, you can feel that shadow hanging over everything, can't you?
Oh, definitely.
Willie keeps looking back, almost like his own failures are somehow tied to this bigger shift in the national mood. He's really longing for that seemingly expansive, maybe even naively confident time, the 1920s,
Yeah, the Roaring Twenties.
when the idea was the business of America was business, and that was supposed to be a good thing.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, remember manifest destiny, that belief in America's limitless potential, ordained expansion. Willie lives in a country built on this idea of just boundless opportunity.
Okay.
So if he's not succeeding in what's supposed to be the greatest country in the world, the logic, however flawed it is, leads him to think the fault must be entirely his own.
Exactly. And in this cheerleader society, as the intro calls it,
Mm-hmm. Good phrase.
where your personal value seems directly tied to your professional achievements, failing isn't just a letdown. It attacks your very sense of who you are.
Right, your identity.
So it makes perfect sense why Willie gets so desperate for his sons to achieve the success he couldn't. It's like he's trying to, I don't know, retroactively validate his own life through them.
This really raises a crucial point, doesn't it, about the immense pressure people face when their self-worth gets so tangled up with external societal measures of success.
Totally.
Willie's hopes for Biff and Happy become this attempt to reclaim a sense of a life that he feels has just gone off the rails somehow.
It's almost unbelievable when you think about where the seed of this incredibly powerful play came from for Miller.
Yeah.
The introduction mentions a short story he wrote when he was just 17 about this aging, unsuccessful salesman.
Wow, 17.
Yeah, and the picture it paints is pretty grim. The guy can't sell anything, faces constant disrespect, and ultimately ends his own life.
And what's particularly striking there is that Miller himself remembered that the real-life inspiration for that early character also died by suicide, threw himself in front of a subway train.
God, that's dark.
Yeah, so a powerful image that clearly stuck with him and, evolved over many years into Death of a Salesman.
But the play's roots go even deeper, right? Into his own family experiences. His uncle, Manny Newman.
Ah, yes, man.
Sounds like a character who could have walked straight onto Miller's stage.
Yeah.
This incredibly competitive guy viewed life as this constant rivalry between his sons and Miller and his brother.
That description of the Newman household is so telling, isn't it? Trembling with resolutions and shouts of victories that had not yet taken place but surely would tomorrow.
Yeah.
It perfectly captures that relentless optimism we were just talking about, that almost like feverish belief in future triumphs. You can almost feel the tension.
And Manny's sons, especially Buddy, seem to have mirrored Biff and Happy in their younger days.
The Golden Boys.
Right, the celebrated athlete, the charming one, popular with girls. But the intro hints at later struggles, especially for Buddy, which definitely echoes how Willie's son's early promise doesn't quite pan out.
Makes you wonder about the long-term impact of all that pressure, doesn't it?
For sure.
And what's also really poignant is the connection drawn between Manny's wife and Linda Lohman.
Yeah.
That image of her keeping up a calm, enthusiastic smile despite her husband's obvious anxieties. It really resonates with Linda's role as this incredibly supportive figure navigating Willie's, well, increasingly volatile emotions. She's the anchor.
Miller even talks about how visiting the Newmans as a teenager made him feel like he was somehow destined for failure, even before he'd really started his adult life.
Wow.
And that dynamic, being constantly measured and found wanting, seems to play out in the play with Bernard, the neighbor's son.
The steady one.
Who the Lohmans kind of dismiss, even though he's quietly successful.
Yeah, that early experience of being under constant scrutiny, feeling the weight of others' expectations and their, perceived successes.
Yeah.
That seems to have been really formative for Miller. Clearly influenced his understanding of Willie's anxieties.
But the intro also points to something beyond just the almost comical intensity of these optimistic figures like Manny.
What's that?
It talks about the intrepid valor Miller saw in salesmen. He compares them to artists or actors.
Oh, right.
Constantly facing rejection, but still holding on to the hope of that next big break.
Yeah.
And the crucial thing, Miller noted, was the absolute necessity of being well-liked.
That comparison to artists and actors is so insightful. They're all putting themselves and their product, whether it's a performance, a painting, or a sales pitch out there, constantly vulnerable,
Totally.
but driven by this fundamental human need for connection, for validation. And for a salesman like Willie, in that era, being well-liked wasn't just nice. It was seen as the key to professional triumph.
And personal worth, by extension.
Exactly.
There's a really telling anecdote about Miller running into Manny again years later, after All My Sons was a big hit.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of even mentioning the play, Manny's only comment was about his own son's achievements.
Oh, wow. Still competing.
It just screams that never-ending competitive spirit, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It underscores how deeply ingrained that drive was in that family, and you could argue in a certain part of American society then.
Yeah.
And that encounter, the way past hopes and present realities just collided in that moment, that's what really cemented Miller's desire to write a play that could cut through time.
Right. Show past and present happening at once.
Exactly. Much like our own memories pop into our present thoughts.
Which perfectly brings us to the structure of the play itself. Miller liked comparing it to, what, geological layers?
Yeah, geological strata, or even a SAC scan, giving you this multidimensional view all at once.
It's definitely not a straightforward A then B story, is it?
Not in the slightest. I mean, the surface timeline of the play is roughly 24 hours, give or take.
Yeah.
But that's really just one layer. Miller talks about social time, the broader historical context, like the Depression's effects.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's psychic time. That's Willie's own memories, his flashbacks that constantly interrupt and color his present. It's the interplay between these different times that gives the play its unique feel.
And we see Willie coming home right at the start, timid, dispirited, and bewildered. Such a contrast to these successful, confident salesmen he thought he was or wanted to be.
Yeah, he's like a fallen figure, someone who fully bought into the American ideal but is now just lost.
Adrift.
Mm-hmm. The juxtaposition between his idealized memories being this respected, successful guy and the harsh reality of his present as a struggling drummer, barely getting by, it's incredibly powerful.
And that's emphasized by the setting too, right? His house, which you remember surrounded by open space,
With its own trees.
is now hemmed in with apartment houses.
Yeah.
A really tangible symbol of how the world moved on and left him behind.
Definitely. And his final desperate act, driving off to his death, it's this horribly misguided attempt to finally achieve that dream, to somehow rival his brother Ben, in financial terms, by trading his life for insurance money.
The logic is just so tragically flawed.
It's a profound irony, isn't it? He thinks this ultimate sacrifice will finally secure his legacy, provide for his family, validate his life. But it's all based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what actually matters.
Yeah.
And the play's structure itself mirrors that internal struggle. It keeps circling back, Willie desperately searching for where it all went wrong, those betrayals, real or imagined, that fractured his family.
Technically speaking, the play was a huge leap from Miller's earlier work like All My Sons, wasn't it?
Oh,
The
absolutely.
intro highlights those almost instant time shifts, the dreamlike quality of the language.
Right. All My Sons was much more traditional, more Ibsen-like in its structure. Linear cause and effect.
Correct.
Death of a Salesman really broke new ground. It found a form that perfectly reflected its complex psychological and social themes. Miller even played with using verse initially.
Really?
Yeah, aiming for this heightened emotion and almost lyrical quality sometimes.
And the original stage design by Joe Mielziner sounds absolutely critical to making that fluidity work. Bare platforms, minimal furniture.
Yeah, it forced the focus onto the characters and their inner turmoil, not the physical stuff.
The set itself became a metaphor, didn't it? Those dying trees around the house.
Visually representing Willie's fading dreams, the encroaching modern world. And Mielziner's innovations for the time, shifts like the subtle elevator, those papier-mâché pillows for the bedroom scenes,
Clever.
they were incredibly effective. Eliminated the need for disruptive blackouts, kept the play flowing.
It's fascinating how those technical choices actually fed back into Miller's writing process.
Exactly. Allowed him to revise, refine, capture how Willie's mind jumps between past and present so quickly.
Other productions have used different visuals too, right? Like that National Theater one.
Yeah, the stark open space with a sawn-through tree. A powerful symbol of Willie's fractured memories, his broken link to nature.
But the core idea is the same.
Right, the staging is integral to conveying that nonlinear, deeply subjective experience of time.
The real core of the play seems to be those raw emotional clashes between the characters, doesn't it?
I think so.
The intro quotes Miller wanting plenty of space for people to confront each other with their feelings rather than for people to advance the plot. That feels key.
It really is. The play isn't driven by, a series of big dramatic events in the usual sense. It's about the gradual unraveling of relationships, exploring the characters' inner emotional worlds. Elia Kazan, the original director, described it as unfolding in an arena of people watching the events. Sometimes internal, sometimes external, sometimes both.
An arena. I like that.
Yeah, the open stage, the constant presence of characters, even when silent. It really emphasizes that sense of an emotional battleground.
Let's really get into Willie himself now. The intro points out his basic inability to face reality, how he constantly twists his perception.
Yeah, he cannot bear reality.
We see it so clearly with Biff. One minute he's a star, the next a bum. His possessions change value in his mind. And definitely his own success or lack thereof.
And since he can't do much to change it, he keeps changing his ideas of it. That's Miller's observation. Willie's memories aren't reliable recordings. They're reshaped constantly to serve his present needs, to prop up his fragile ego.
And then there's his brother, Ben. He becomes this almost mythical figure in Willie's head.
Yeah, the embodiment of ruthless success.
The kind Willie admires, but also resents, because he feels he should have achieved it.
Ben represents that really seductive but ultimately maybe destructive side of the American dream, right?
Yeah.
Success through cunning, assertiveness, seizing opportunities regardless of ethics.
Definitely.
For Willie, Ben is this constant, almost taunting reminder of his own perceived failures, his missed chances.
The line between what's real and what's in Willie's imagination just completely dissolves as the play goes on, doesn't it?
It really does.
He's built his whole life on denial. Can't acknowledge failure. Can't take responsibility.
But Miller also saw kind of nobility in Willie's struggle, in his refusal to just give up on his dreams.
Even though they're illusions.
Exactly. Even though that very energy gets tragically misdirected into maintaining what Miller calls a lethal illusion, his basic desire to leave a mark, to make his life mean something that's deeply human, even if it's misguided and self-destructive.
The intro even calls him an activist in his relentless striving for progress.
Yeah, even though his definition of progress is so warped, based on superficial stuff.
Right.
Miller argues Willie isn't just pathetic. He's grappling with these huge questions of self-worth and significance in a society that seems to marginalize people, especially as they age.
The deep irony, of course, is that he seeks meaning in external success.
Yeah, societal measures.
Instead of in the real relationships right in front of him. He's the ultimate true believer in a system that ultimately fails him.
And maybe the most heartbreaking flaw is his complete blindness to the genuine love and support from Linda, from Charlie, even from Biff, in his own conflicted way.
Hmm.
He's so consumed by these societal myths of achievement, external validation, that he just can't recognize or value the authentic human connections he already has.
That's really the core of the tragedy, isn't it?
I think so. He puts immense value on external approval, material stuff, completely overlooking the things, love, loyalty, that could have actually given him real meaning.
Which leads us right into that ongoing debate. Is it a tragedy in the classic sense, or is it social commentary?
Right, critiquing American society. The intro mentions Eric Bentley arguing it's almost got to be one or the other, either about a flawed guy or a flawed system.
But the intro makes a good point that, like in Greek tragedies or Shakespeare,
Oedipus, Hamlet.
both elements can be powerfully present and intertwined. Miller himself defined tragedy as arising from man's total compulsion to evaluate himself.
And Willie's personal tragedy is his inability to achieve true self-knowledge, that critical moment of recognizing his own flaws, the reality of his situation.
It's Biff who eventually gets there, right? To that painful understanding.
Yeah, Biff rejects the false promises of that dream, seeks a different kind of fulfillment.
Though his move to a simpler rural life,
Hmm.
it can feel a bit like an escape, maybe.
You could interpret it that way, or as a conscious rejection of the pressures and false values that destroyed his father. He's trying to find an authentic self, not tied to Willie's superficial definitions of success.
Linda Lohman has also stirred up a lot of critical debate, hasn't she?
Oh, definitely.
The intro mentions that harsh accusation of her being a dumb and useful doormat, just enabling Willie's delusions.
That's really severe and, as the intro points out, pretty inaccurate. Miller consistently argued Linda is actually very resilient, very tough.
The one holding it together.
In many ways, yes, despite Willie's fragile state and unrealistic hopes. But it's also true she's a product of her time. She partly defines her own worth through Willie's perceived success.
And she shares his belief that everything will be fine once the debts are paid.
Right. That somewhat naive belief. Her heartbreaking use of the word free at the very end
Yeah, when arguably none of them are free.
is incredibly poignant. Her unwavering love, her fierce determination, they aren't enough to save Willie from himself. But that doesn't make her passive or dumb.
No way.
She's very much a victim of Willie's huge ego and a societal structure that valued his ambition over her quiet, essential role.
There's also that interesting, sometimes controversial discussion about whether the Lohmans are meant to be seen as Jewish.
Right, based on certain speech patterns, some critics here.
The introduction addresses this pretty directly, though.
It does. It notes that while some critics point to linguistic cadences, Miller himself explicitly said he wasn't trying to create ethnically specific characters or write naturalistically like that.
He wanted something else.
Yeah, a more heightened, almost poetic dialogue style. He called it emergency speech, meant to convey raw emotion, not everyday chat.
And didn't he write Focus before this, which directly tackled anti-Semitism?
Exactly. Which strongly suggests if he'd intended the Lohmans to be Jewish, he wouldn't have been shy about making it explicit.
So those echoes are more stylistic.
Seems likely. A byproduct of his attempt to create that heightened emotional urgency, not a specific ethnic tag.
Miller himself offered quite a few interpretations of the play over the years, didn't he?
He certainly did. The intro lists quite a range.
He saw it exploring paradoxes of technology, family conflict, society suppressing the individual.
Right. The tragedy of a man killing himself because he feels unliked, irrelevant, and just a reflection of a breakdown in core societal values.
But the central one he seemed to highlight, especially later with that Chinese production,
Yeah.
was that Death of a Salesman, really, is a love story between a man and his son, and in a crazy way between both of them and America.
That's a fascinating way to frame it.
It really is.
And it feels like a crucial lens for understanding the play's enduring power. That incredibly complex, often painful dynamic between Willie and Biff,
Their mutual dependence.
coupled with their fierce struggle for their own autonomy. That's the heart of it. Biff is Willie's last desperate hope for validation.
And Willie is the flawed model Biff is trying so hard to break free from, to find his own identity.
It's this constant push and pull, isn't it? Biff wants an authentic life, his own terms.
But he's still bound by love for his father.
Who, in turn, desperately needs Biff to embrace his distorted vision of success so he can feel his own life wasn't a waste.
And Biff is trapped. Does he reinforce the illusions to try and save his dad from despair?
Or does he pursue his own truth, his own self-worth, even if that truth shatters Willie's world?
Yeah. It really shows the destructive potential of those false values when they get so deeply ingrained in who you think you are.
The intro makes a really important distinction, too. The play isn't necessarily a full-on attack on all American values,
Right.
but more a focused look at their potential betrayal, the devastating human cost when materialism becomes the only measure of worth.
Exactly. There's that clear contrast between Willie's distorted, superficial dream and the more grounded, practical approach of Charlie and Bernard.
Willie's dream is all shallow, external markers. Charlie and Bernard focus on actual hard work, curiosity, real human connection.
Miller clearly had a sharp critique of what he called the bullshit of capitalism.
Oh, yeah, those hollow, superficial markers of so-called achievement.
He saw the play as a kind of time bomb.
Ticking beneath that glossy surface of the American dream, where people are pressured to strive for this often illusory greatness by accumulating stuff rather than cultivating meaningful lives.
The salesman figure itself is such a recurring American icon in literature, isn't it?
It really is. The intro gives that great list: Twain, Lewis, Updike, O'Neill, Williams, Mamet.
Wow.
The salesman often embodies both that quintessential American optimism and a certain degree of, well, trickery, selling not just a product, but a vision of a better future.
But what's so poignant about Willie is he isn't really selling a tangible product.
Right.
He's selling himself and the unattainable dream of tomorrow. He's tragically confused his job with his identity, completely buying into the promises of advertising and the idealized American way.
Ultimately, Willie's core tragedy seems to be that he never truly knew himself, never developed a genuine sense of self-worth that wasn't dependent on the fleeting reflections he saw in others' eyes.
Especially customers and his sons.
Yeah. He lived his whole life seeking external validation, constantly performing for buyers, for his sons, hoping for admiration, even for the memory of his absent father and successful brother.
And as he loses that validation,
He inevitably loses his grip on his own sense of self.
the intro wraps up by highlighting that salesman has more pity and less judgment compared to All My Sons.
Mm-hmm.
Willie isn't a pure villain, not a criminal in the usual sense, but he's consumed by this profound, debilitating guilt.
And his final act, the suicide, is this tragically desperate, misguided attempt to finally get that promised reward. To secure a financial legacy, find some meaning in death that eluded him in life.
The ultimate heartbreaking irony.
Absolutely.
Even the initial resistance from the studio to the play's title,
Right, they wanted something upbeat.
their desire to promote a positive image of the salesman, it really says a lot about the critical themes the play tackles head on.
They wanted to sanitize it, focus on the wonderful lifestyle and social utility. But the play's enduring global appeal, as the intro rightly says,
Yeah.
lies precisely in its unflinching look at that universal, often painful gap between our hopes and our realities. And that persistent, deeply human hope for a better future for our kids, even when that hope is tragically misdirected.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, we've really seen how Willie Loman embodies those shattered promises of the American dream, right? Constantly wrestling with the crushing weight of societal expectations, the blurred lines between a romanticized past and a harsh present.
Definitely. His poignant, ultimately heartbreaking struggle for self-worth in a world that often equates success with superficial stuff, it just continues to resonate across cultures, across generations.
Death of a Salesman remains this profoundly powerful, timeless exploration of these core themes. It really compels us to look critically at our own relationship with ambition, how we define success.
And the often unspoken promises our societies make, and the potential cost of believing them too blindly.
And that leaves you, our listener, with this final, maybe uncomfortable thought. In a world still so driven by the pursuit of success, external validation, how can we actively avoid the same pitfalls that consumed Willie Loman?
Yeah, what truly makes a life meaningful, fulfilling?
How do we strike a healthier balance between our dreams and the complex realities of human connection, self-acceptance, and the genuine love that might already be around us?
It's definitely something worth reflecting on long after our deep dive ends.